I am Pharaoh. I am the son and the child of Ra. I represent Amun-Ra. I am deity. I sat on the throne of two nations in Egypt. I'm the master of the Nile, and the gods serve me. When I speak, it becomes law. My will is absolutely divine, and it will not be questioned. All of the gods, Isis, Osiris, Apis, Hecate, you call all their names. They exist to assist me in leading the greatest kingdom on earth, the Egyptian empire. It is the gods, my gods, who make the sun to travel across the sky every day. It is my God who causes the Nile Delta to flood every single year and can become fertile so that life comes time and time again. It is my gods that make my legion strong, that make my army strong, that allow me to control the world. And then came Moshe. You call him Moses. Moses. Who was he? Moshe was nobody but a nobody. He commanded no armies. He had no slaves. He had no power whatsoever. He was a Hebrew, a Jew, a slave himself, except being adopted by my grandfather. Moshe, who would dare come back to my palace, the place we shared in common, because he also was raised there. But Moses had been a coward. He killed an Egyptian, which is worthy of death. He tried to lead his people, and they rejected him. So what did he do? He ran to the desert for 40 years, where he's been out there being a recluse and a coward and an absolute nobody. And what did he do? He comes back to my palace, and he stands before me, and he demands that I release my slaves. How much audacity must you have to come to me and tell me to release my slaves? They're my slaves. They belong to me. The Hebrew people living in the land of Goshen, they were the sweat of Egypt and nothing more. They were the workers that made buildings and built cities and constructed temples. They were the workmen that would create statues to my gods. And so when Moses came to me and asked me to free my slaves, I laughed out loud at him. Who does he think he is? Seriously. I would have struck him dead on the spot and had him beheaded immediately. But technically, he's an Egyptian, and we have laws against such things. Who is his God? A God of slaves. I serve the mighty Egyptian God. I am Amun-Ra in the flesh. And he comes to me with a God of slaves to think that he can come against the mighty Egyptian gods. But as I laughed, Moshe just looked at me. He just stayed quiet. He didn't argue. He would let me say my piece, and then he would just simply say, "Let my people go." And it was after that time that I would learn a 10-course lesson. 10 plagues that you've heard about that would teach me who his God, Yahweh, Jehovah, really was. You see, I thought it was just a trick when he took his staff and he waved it across the Nile. I've seen tricks before. But what I did not expect was when he waved his staff across the Nile that it would immediately become blood. And I don't mean red water. The artery of Egypt that fed us, that gave us fertility, that gave us food, immediately became coagulated, putrid, stinking blood. Fish came up with their white bellies facing the air. Crocodiles died instantly. Hippos suffocated in coagulated blood. Awful. And our God of the Nile, her name is Happy. Quite a bit of irony for an English word, isn't it? Happy was nowhere to be found. And my magicians needed to redeem their reputation. And so they did the same trick, and they turned water into blood. Little bitty amounts of it, and I don't even know that it was blood. It may have just been red tint. I don't know. But who cares? I didn't need more blood. For 7 days, the Egyptians dug holes, trying to get a water well, trying to find fresh water. And there would be none. Except in the land of Goshen. They were drinking pretty good. And if you could stop the Nile and turn the Nile into blood, it almost got me. He almost got me, convinced me. But at the last minute, I thought to myself, wait, I will not bow myself down to a god of slaves. The Egyptian gods are stronger and they're better. I'll not change. And then frogs. Sounds laughable at first. Sounds like dinner, doesn't it? Plague of frogs, just give us supper. This was different. And you see, we have a frog God. We have a frog God representing now an eternity that's powerful God. And we're inundated with our frog God. Frogs were everywhere. They're in the fields, they're in the ponds, they're overcoming the kitchen. My wife pulls back the covers on her bed, and what is there? But hundreds of frogs. You go to the bath and you put incense in the water, and the water is just covered up with frogs. You can't get rid of them. They're everywhere you go. And when I walked into my palace, I couldn't get them out of the way. And no matter how many I kicked, there'd be another one underneath my feet. And I was stepping on and walking in the guts of my God. So I called Moses and I bargained with him. And I said, if you'll just get rid of these frogs, you can go outside and do your worship thing. And at that moment, all the frogs were gone, or at least they were dead. You can't imagine the stench of millions upon millions of frogs heaped up. And we're piling up our gods and burning them in the middle of the streets. But my heart was hard. And every time it got just an ounce of tenderness, I would reverse it. And I reversed it this time. And I said, no, you're not leaving. And then came the gnats. Oh, some of your versions say lice. It doesn't matter, let me tell you. They're little bitty, tiny, minuscule flying insects that bite and they sting. And after they sting you, you're left itching. And it's an insane itch. And they're everywhere. There's no orifice on your body in which these creatures are not entering. They're in your nose, they're in your ears, they're crawling around your eyelids, they're going in your mouth, they are in your clothing. You can't keep them away from your children. They're all over the babies. My magician said they could recreate that. These tiny bugs, these gnats that were in every temple, even the statues of our gods, were covered up with gnats. Another one of our representatives. My wise men, my magicians. They said they were going to do it, but they couldn't. And they said, this is the finger of God. They tried to advise me. They tried to tell me this is some source beyond what anything we know. I would not relent. It'll go. And then came flies. Everywhere. We enjoy flies, don't we? Don't you love them buzzing around your face when you're trying to have a good meal? Well, I want you to imagine flies that come in a cloud that darkens the sun. I want you to imagine when you go to the market and you try to buy a date that there are gnats and flies all over it, just covered up. That when you try to buy a select piece of meat, it's got those fly specks everywhere. And it dawned on me. This God of slaves, this Hebrew God, is toying with me. He's playing with me like I'm nothing. And he's slowly making a show of all of our gods and how powerless they are. And so I called Moses and I said, Moshe, you can go, but don't go very far, but you can go to the wilderness, just don't go a long way. And as soon as I said that, my heart hardened and rage hit me. And I said, no, you're not going. You're going to stay right here. Then the animals started dying. All of them. Cows, camels, goats, sheep, horses. They just fell dead. You see, we have another god, Apis. Apis has the head of a bull. So now he's striking down those gods. Apis was part of the underworld. And he was a messenger between God and men. And we have those bulls laying dead everywhere. Apis was no good. My priests were of no value whatsoever. They couldn't do anything. My God's completely unresponsive. If they were there, they sure weren't doing anything about it. But I still did not relent. And then came boils. Some of you grew up calling these rhizins. Infected nodules, cysts. But these things were everywhere. It was not one behind your knee. It was not one behind your ear. It was not one some obscure place. They were all over you from head to toe. And they get as big as oranges. And you could not, there wasn't enough time to lance them all. And once they got to this huge size, they would burst. And you'd have so many on you, you would sit there in your own blood and pus, stinking. My priests were so eaten up with them, they couldn't serve me. They couldn't stand. They couldn't move. And my body was racked in pain. But my pride. And then came hail. You think you know hailstorms. You think you've seen something. This was hail mixed with fire. Probably what you'd call lightning. And the storm came in like nothing you'd ever seen. An emerald green cloud that just sat upon us. And with all the lightning, with all the fire, came hailstones so large that it would hit an animal in the head and kill it instantly. My slaves, my servants, our children were outside playing and in the fields, and they were instantly killed by these hailstones. And the hailstones obliterated everything they hit. The rooftops were gone. Buildings were gone. Statues destroyed. All the crops cut down to nothing by these hailstones. And I said, I will not let these people go. I am Pharaoh. I'm the child of Amun-Ra. And then the locust. The locust came in a cloud. You could hear them coming, what you would compare to the sound of a jet, coming from far off in the distance. And they came and they blackened the sun, and when they hit the ground, whatever was left from the hailstones, they would eat all the way below the dirt line. There was no barley, there was no wheat, there was no grain, there was nothing left in the fields whatsoever because the locust ate it all. The mothers that left their babies sitting outside to play, the locust would eat the tender flesh off the baby's cheeks. I was not quitting. My pride. And then the sunshine. The god Ra, who spends every nighttime fighting evil so that he can bring the sun up the next morning, the sun didn't come up. Ra was defeated. We had darkness. But those Hebrews, Moses, his people 20 miles away, have the brightest sun, drinking fresh water. No boils, no lice, no flies. Their cattle are doing well. They're eating well. They're drinking fresh water in the sunshine. And I'm beginning to wonder, maybe I'm not a god at all. And maybe the Egyptian gods aren't gods at all. And the final blow, number 10. Moses told me that God was going to kill the firstborn in all of Egypt. And the Hebrews weren't exempt from this one. The Hebrews had some sort of magic where if you took the blood of a lamb and you put it above your door, a perfect lamb, and you put the blood up there, when this death angel came through sent by Yahweh, their Jehovah, the death angel would see the blood of the unspotted lamb and would go and let their kids live. Well, we didn't know those practices, and we didn't know such a thing. And that night there was a wailing in Egypt like nothing you've ever heard. Mothers and fathers and grandparents wailing from the pits of hell. The pain and the agony of walking into the room and seeing that your newborn is dead. Of having dinner with your 30-year-old firstborn and they keel over. The whole world was screaming in horror, and I was not exempt. I lost my son. It's not enough that he destroyed the Nile, our God. That he made a mockery of all of our other gods with flies and frogs and bulls. That he took away our livelihood, we got nothing to eat. That he's destroyed our animals. Now he's taken away the Pharaoh, the next ruler of Egypt, is dead. And absolutely racked in pain, I called Moshe and I said, "Get out of here, I just don't want to see you. Whoever your God is, take your people and go." But my pride. I couldn't let go of my throne. I couldn't let go of being deity. And so I chased them to the sea. I was determined that I would go to that sea and with what's left of my army, and I would remain and I'd protect and fight for what's left of my dignity, and I'll go to that sea and I'll take those slaves and I'll bring them back. And I'll restore Egypt to its former glory. And when I got to the sea, I saw something I never thought I would see in my entire life. The sea parted. It split in half. Like two walls on either side made of water. And you could look through the water and you could see sea beasts in there. You could see animals, fish. And they were going across the bottom of the water like it was dry land. The bottom of the sea was as dry as the sands of Egypt. And they were just moving across. And I sat in my chariot and I thought to myself, there's no God of Egypt that's ever done anything like that. And I should have. Do you have any should haves in your life? Wishes? Ought to haves? I should have turned around and I should have said, that's it. That God is the God. But I didn't. My pride. And I gave the command and I ordered my army, my legions, to go across into that sea, but it didn't work for them the same way. When they got to the ground, it was not dry as the sands. When they got to it, it was mud.
and the chariots began to sink, and they began to get fearful, and my soldiers were crying out, "This is the hand of God." And for the very first time, I was afraid. I was terrified because the truth was dawning on me what was going on. This was a power like I have never seen, and a power that I have never possessed. Jehovah God is something special altogether, something different altogether. And I look back just in time to see those waters come back together. And I saw the chariots blown apart and the pieces floating. I saw spears floating on the water. I heard the wails of my soldiers as they drowned. All of my life, I worshiped gods made of gold. I worshiped gods of silver. Gods made of fine stones. Why, I worship gods with the head of falcons and the head of frogs, and gods with the head of bulls. I've worshiped gods that control rivers, and gods that control the environment, and gods that control the sun. And in one instant, in one moment, Yahweh blew it all away. And I was left asking myself, where was my God power when the Nile got turned to blood? Where was my deity when the gnats came and the frogs came and the flies came around? When the bulls fell over dead, where was my strength and my power and my glory? But the worst, when Yahweh killed my boy, where was my ability to put breath back in his lungs? And I knew at that moment, my gods weren't just dead. They'd never been alive. And I knew at that moment what Moses meant when he said, the one that sent him was the great I am. I am who I am. He's always been and he always will be. I realized at that moment that all of the combined powers of the Egyptian gods were nothing against this one singular God who does not need a palace, that does not need a statue, doesn't need priests. He just wants relationships. And this God did something I've never seen an Egyptian God do. He fought for his people. Still does. He fought for his people and he won. He won. And I realized, standing there soaked in salt water, that I'm no God at all. I'm just a broken man. I'm a humiliated man whose pride stopped him from saying the truth, whose pride destroyed everything around him. And I became absolutely, fully aware that there is one God, and He is the great I am. He is Jehovah God, the God of the Hebrews, and now the God of the Christians. He is that one God. And I now know that Moses, for 3.5 millennia, has been in heaven and listening to the songs of angels, and he's right there with God. And you want to know where I am? All that's left of me is a desiccated shell. That's me. Thutmose. Don't forget my name. Thutmose. That is me. That desiccated shell is all that's left of me. And now it's a desecrated shell. But that does not touch the reality of where my soul is. Because of my pride, my soul is separated from everything good for eternity. Don't take 10 lessons to learn who God is. He is the great I am. He will fight for his people, and he will win.